Namaskar, I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. Welcome to this new episode of our series Disha. It is an initiative by Department of Justice to spread legal literacy and awareness among the masses. The idea is that if you are legally informed, you are in a better position to fight for your rights and get justice. The theme of the episode today is social inclusion of people with disabilities. In the episode, in the conversations, we'll try and explore the challenges faced by this section of our society and what are the social, economic and legal remedies and opportunities available for them. Two special guests are joining me to take the conversation forward. Let me welcome both of them. I have with me Amar Jain. You are a corporate lawyer, accessibility professional and co-founder of Mission Accessibility. I also have with me Arman Ali, Executive Director, National Center for Promotion of Employment of Disabled People. Warm welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Right. So, given that both of you engage so deeply with people who are facing the challenge of disabilities in their lives, give us an insight into the key aspirations, the key challenges that they come to you with that we often as society overlook. Arman, if I can start with you.
Subhendu, I think the key challenges and needs of people with disability are the same as anybody else. The challenge is to get access to education, get access to employment, get access to family life, public life, to participate in the mainstream. There's so many barriers around disability that your activities of daily living becomes a challenge. It becomes looks like a Herculean task. The biggest challenge that you see around disability is that it's an afterthought. The disability inclusion remains an afterthought. Though if you look at the Union of India, the Union Government of India, we got fantastic policies. Great laws and policies. India has ratified UNCRPD and so on, but when you go to the states, because disability is a state subject, the implementation is very poor. There's acute lack of awareness about disability. So the challenges when people come to us is when they are not able to access education and employment and to go from one place to another, which is something very basic for any Indian.
Amar, if I can come to you with the same questions, if you can open the conversation.
Sure.
What are the first, most crucial aspects of people with disabilities that we must pay attention to?
So, look, Shubhendu, I think disability is always thought of either by people with disabilities who face the challenge of disability or by people living around them. But the other common masses, and estimation is about 7% of the world population has some form of disability, if that's correct. And then the 94% does not think of disability in the way it should be thought of. So the first challenge that I like to call out is attitude towards persons with disabilities of the common masses and attitude of persons with disabilities for themselves as to what they are capable of doing and what they can do is very, very critical. The second challenge that we often face is discrimination when you want to go avail a product or a service. Because of the way our disabilities are, people think that we are different. And hence, whether we are entitled to, say, a bank account or entitled to a movable property, entitled to financial facilities or not, that becomes a very critical question. The next challenge that I feel is empowerment, where people with disabilities are not empowered due to the barriers that are part of the system, which kind of allows them to take, say, recourse to legal aid if they need, or recourse to their kind of implementation of their rights. Rights and policies basically provide us dignified survival, but the implementation remains a key gap.
It's hugely important points. Arman, taking cue from what Amar just mentioned, to what extent as a collective society have we evolved from a certain charity welfare approach towards people with disabilities to talking about their rights and talking about them as equals? To what extent have we been able to make that transition?
I think we just started that conversation in some forums, but it's a long way to go. The best part is that disabled people themselves are able to articulate their problems, they are able to articulate themselves, and they are not waiting for anybody else to come and rescue. You know, young people with disabilities from across the country, irrespective where they come from, because of the kind of law we have, and the, you know, it guarantees certain rights.
Right.
So people with disability who identify themselves with their identity of a disabled person are able to take the discourse forward. People with disability have been started to become a part of the mainstream society, not on an equal basis with others. But this process started, you know, you're there in the room, but are you on the equal basis with other? That's a question. And it starts from a classroom. You know, if there's a person with disability in the classroom, is the student with disability able to get education on an equal basis with others? Are they able to participate in everything? I think the participation is a challenge. You know, today you'll find disability mentioned in almost every document that you come across, irrespective, okay, irrespective whether it's private or. I think we've come a long way that way. You know, there's a lot of noise around disability. You'll find disability being, you know, being part of a lot of discourse, but it remains a token. Like it's a tokenist approach where you want to be, you know, it's an optic thing that you want to do that in. So, for example, if you look at in accessible elections, great. I mean, one of the biggest exercise in the world. It's taking disabled people along, but then you don't talk of political participation of disabled people. So you know, you cannot just inspire people to come and vote, which is your right, and so, you know, likewise.
So if you talk about equality,
so
they have the right to be equal in every every segment and of our society and participation. This is a hugely important point that you mentioned, Arman, about informed youths. Amar, if I can get that point to you, you're also a lawyer.
Yeah.
If you can inform all our viewers, whether they are people with disabilities or not, what is the law of the land? What does our legal documents say about the rights of people with disabilities? What are the important aspects that everyone must be aware of? If you can briefly give us an insight into it.
Sure. So, Shubhendu, if you look at the current landscape, the legislative landscape that we have in India, there's a law which is called as Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016, and then there are rules made thereunder and a couple of notifications and other policy measures. See, fundamentally, what are we trying to say? That one, do not discriminate on the basis of our disability, right? So that is not allowed under the law. Second, we are saying that as persons with disabilities, we are equally entitled to own our own movable and immovable assets, to vote, to have inclusive education, equal employment opportunities, accessibility, which is a cross-cutting issue, and to have accessible products and services. So, and reasonable accommodation, because while we are talking of giving equal status to people with disabilities, but the fact that we need a separate law on people with disabilities, we need system to provide reasonable accommodations, means that the departure has to be made from equality in that sense, to some extent, to be able to equate people with disabilities with others. So that's broadly, you know, the basic rights to have your own family, to live in a community. See, ultimately we are saying all that any individual is entitled to for any basic thing, that you are also entitled as a person with disability. That's the fundamental of the law, principle of the law.
Right. So the Constitution is looking at every person with an equality basis. Arman, your organization is dealing with people with disabilities and helping them empower themselves, helping them get jobs, get employment. As Amar mentioned, that the law looks at everyone as equals, give provisions to those in need. But in real life, where the application of the law is concerned, where getting justice is concerned, what are the challenges that people with disabilities are facing when they are trying to get on with their lives, get employment and get empowered?
You know, there are three things here. You know, I think employment cannot happen without education.
Sure.
Okay. And both employment and education cannot happen without accessibility. The freedom to move from one place to another. And accessibility doesn't only move transport. You know, accessibility means access to information, access to services, product, and so on. The law is very clear. and we have one of the strongest legislation in the world when it comes to persons with disability. But it is a piece of paper if people with disability are not aware of the law, they don't sensitize themselves about this, they don't understand about their right, because it is in the nature of things, Subhendu, that rights must be fought for. It will not come to you in a platter. So you have a law, but disability being a state subject, it is looked at from a different prism. Each state looks at differently. The challenges are the same, you know, and the biggest challenge I personally think is that looking at disability as a welfare and a charity issue is the biggest hurdle. India is a welfare state, so it's want to take care of its people. But if you want equality, I mean, I say this to all my brothers and sisters with disability, that they must understand their right, they must come forward and, you know, assert whatever is their demand and rights are. Like Amar keeps saying this, you know, that there is no promotions, there is no progress. You know, you will find people who joined a particular private company 15 years back still in the same position. The salary may have grown a little bit every year, but they are not in a, you know, authority position, they are not in a leadership position. Right. So I think all that needs to be considered, and people are looking for jobs. I think there's a huge requirement for creating jobs for people with disabilities.
And we'll continue this conversation with our guests. We're heading for a short break. We'll be right back.
चाचा प्रणाम।
प्रणाम।
चाचा ड्यूटी जा रहे हैं, बिटिया का ध्यान रखिएगा।
ठीक है, कोई बात नहीं, आपकी बेटी हमारी बेटी।
जाओ बिटिया।
ओए होए कहाँ चली?
मेरा नाम गीता है। मैं छेड़छाड़ से परेशान हूँ, मेरी मदद कीजिए।
भारत में कई ऐसे कानून हैं जो महिलाओं एवं बच्चों के सशक्तिकरण एवं संरक्षण के लिए बनाए गए हैं। अगर आपको और सहायता की जरूरत है तो कानूनी सलाह के लिए लीगल एडवाइस को चुनें और कोर्ट में वकील के प्रतिनिधित्व के लिए लीगल असिस्टेंस पर क्लिक करें। अगर आपको अब भी किसी मानवीय सहायता की जरूरत है तो आप हमारे इस टेली फैसिलिटेशन सर्विस के तहत IVRS बेस्ड हेल्पलाइन सॉल्यूशन को चुन सकती हैं। इसके लिए आप 14454 डायल करें। धन्यवाद।
नमस्कार, मैं आशीष आपकी किस तरह से सहायता कर सकता हूँ?
मेरा नाम गीता है। मैं छेड़छाड़ से बहुत परेशान हूँ, मेरी मदद कीजिए।
आपके मामले को देखते हुए आपकी बात अपने काउंसलर से कराता हूँ। आप अपनी बात इनसे खुलकर कहिए, इससे आप अपने आप में आत्मविश्वास महसूस करेंगी। इसके पश्चात मैं आपको लॉयर से कनेक्ट करा दूंगा।
लोगों तक न्याय की पहुंच को और आसान करने के लिए न्याय विभाग भारत सरकार की पेशकश न्याय सेतु, एकदम गोपनीय और सुरक्षित माध्यम जिसे समाज के सभी वर्गों के साथ साथ खास तौर पर दिव्यांगों, महिलाओं, बच्चों और वरिष्ठ नागरिकों सहित सभी जरूरतमंदों को ध्यान में रखकर डिजाइन किया गया है। न्याय सेतु एक ऐसा प्लेटफॉर्म जहां कानूनी जानकारी, टेली लॉ और न्याय बंधु की सभी सेवाओं का है समागम। न्याय सेतु, सभी होंगे अब और सशक्त। न्याय पाने की राह अब होगी आसान।
Welcome back. You're watching Disha. Today we are talking about social inclusion of persons with disabilities. Two special guests, Amar Jain and Arman Ali, continue to be with us. Now, Amar, we were talking about the legal provisions that are there to support and help people with disabilities. And as Arman mentioned, in real life situations, challenges are many more. But even to access justice, to approach the court, to be part of the judicial process is a tedious process in itself for anybody. What has been done by the courts, by the legal systems to bring in some ease for people with disabilities when they have to fight for justice?
Sure, that's a very important question, Shubhendu. So, first of all, in the law itself, under Section 12, there are extensive provisions on making the justice system accessible, which talks about making a courtroom accessible, making the registry or the filing systems accessible, having an accessible process for witness and evidence, and so on and so forth. So that way, the law gives the mandate to both the government as well as the judicial system to have accessibility embedded as part of the system. That's number one. And to fulfill that mandate, both the government as well as the courts are doing their bit. So for instance, Supreme Court of India recently had set up an accessibility committee which then submitted its report, and it is under consideration. High courts have started setting up accessibility committees. For instance, in Delhi High Court, there is a priority given for taking up disability rights cases. They are looking at each component of justice system on how that can be made accessible. I'll give you my own example. I can't read printed copies or handwritten documents because of my blindness. But the court has very clearly said that in case a person with disability approaches us with a request, then he should be provided digitized copy. So that solves a barrier for a person like me to be able to go to court and argue at an equal footing with others.
And quickly, Amar, is there also possible for us to inform our audiences about the simplest legal process that they must initiate in case they feel or they experience discrimination in any context? How should they approach the situation?
Sure. The first thing that I would like to talk about here is that people often leave problems unattended. So when you're denied a bank account, what do? You go to meet your branch manager. Branch manager tells you, no, I can't give you, I'm sorry. And you leave the problem. You need to write to the higher ups, write to the managing director of the bank, write to the CEO, number one. If that does not resolve the problem, you have State Commissioner for Persons with Disabilities and the Chief Commissioner for Persons with Disabilities. They are your gatekeepers. You need to go with a written complaint and your disability certificate, and they will then look into the problem and get it legally resolved.
Arman, you mentioned earlier about the very fundamental challenge of accessibility, and as you rightly mentioned that we sometimes understand accessibility as physical accessibility, to be able to climb stairs or take a lift, but in today's time when the world is going online, it is also about digital accessibility, making all platforms equally approachable for people with disabilities. In that regard, what are the fundamental challenges that still remain, and what is the kind of work that is being done, if you can give us an insight?
No, I think Amar is the best person to answer this question, but I will add that all digital spaces, like whether it's a website, app, they need to be accessible, and there's a GIGW guidelines by Ministry of IT and Electronics, Government of India, but it remains a Herculean task for people with disability to access their own money, trying to order food, trying to with something which you're paying for. It is not something that you freebie. Everything is digital. You want to get a, transport. You want to buy something, grocery. You're transferring money, paying payment, and everything that you want to do is digital. And this is not something that disabled people are getting 50% off if you are using the app. They are paying on equal basis with others, but when this comes to service and accessibility, we get a second-class treatment.
Right. Amar, I'll bring the same question to you. How sensitive is the digital ecosystem around us? And it's in every facet of our life. How sensitive is it to the needs of the people with disabilities?
So thanks for that question, Shubhendu. First of all, it's very important to understand that even people with disabilities need to shop online. They need to find a date or a life partner for themselves. They need to use social media, they need to pay, and they need to do everything else that all of us do in our day-to-day life, right? But when we design our digital platforms, we often design assuming certain things. So for instance, we put out images on our social media accounts without giving a description, thinking that everybody can see the photo, right? So in digital context, we use three senses of our body, which is seeing, hearing, and touching, right? You can't smell the technology and you can't taste the technology as in current state. So your product or a service needs to be capable of being operated through all three senses, or at least two senses. So for instance, when we design forms on the website and we say errors are highlighted by way of red color, why don't we communicate the same in text, right? When we put out a CAPTCHA on our website to verify that you're a human being, we often display image. Why don't we give alternative authentication mechanism for somebody who can't see that image? So we need to think from that inclusion lens when we are designing anything, and consider disability as one of our user base to which we need to cater to.
Right. Taking the conversation forward, also I'd like to, I'm very curious to also learn from both of you, your own personal experiences, your own engagement with disabilities, and how did that also sort of gave you that motivation, that spirit to help others facing a similar challenge. Arman, if you could tell us your story in brief.
Well, every day is a challenge, Subhendu. Every day is a struggle, even considering what I do, where I come from. I'm able to articulate my problems and thoughts. I'm here speaking to you right now. But there are millions of people with disabilities who are locked in their houses in this country. They're not able to see the light of the day. They're not able to go to the nearest grocery shop to buy something that they want. The basic, simple, fundamental rights, education, which, free and compulsory. So, for me, I don't know how it started, how I got into it. It's something, when you grow up, when you become an adult, and you have to get into adulting, you have to, that's when you figure out how the things are. And it just to fight for your own right, and every day, you struggle to get a space which is yours. Just to keep holding on to that space is kind of motivates you every day to do what you do. And I think first, and all of us, I can speak all for every disabled, everybody is trying to find a better life for themselves. In the process, they also help others.
Right. Amar, I must compliment, a smile never leaves your face. Tell us also the story behind it.
Well, I was born blind, and I was in Jodhpur, Rajasthan. And I was studying in a Hindi medium blind school till 12th, and the mindset there was that being blind you won't be able to do much. So you are either choice of religion or your choice of charity, and I did not want to choose either. So I decided to do something different. I wanted to do something different. My parents supported me, hence I became a lawyer and started working as a corporate lawyer, and then also got into disability rights because the space affected me, When I wanted to open my first bank account, when I wanted to open my first demat and trading account, when I wanted to have my first home loan, first credit card, everywhere when I faced denials, I always looked at one thing, that if I am facing this denial, how can I solve it at a policy level for others so that others don't face the same problems that I am facing? And I think that keeps me going there.
Right, and I think stories of both of you is an inspiration in itself, and that takes me, Arman, to the point that you mentioned about that reform has to happen at the most fundamental level of education, where child enters the society. Right. As we come into the close of this conversation, at that level of schooling and education, what changes, what reforms would you like to see? What has been done already, if you can give us an insight, and what reforms in terms of support from teachers, curriculum, infrastructure, that you'd like to see?
So I think, again, since this program is around law and justice and so on, the rights of persons with disability are very clear. It talks about providing free education to any person with disability from 6 to 18. For right to education, it is up to the age of 14, but for disabled people, it's up to 18. The law is very clear that any education institution, aided or recognized, I would repeat, recognized by the government, must provide inclusive education for all children with disability or all people with disability. So I think the point here is that the policymakers need to prioritize this. There's a need to invest in disability.
Right, and Amar, if I can bring the same point to you very briefly about the reforms in the education sector, and if I can quickly also squeeze in the point about the budgetary requirements which may be different for a person facing disabilities. What is the provision to support people in that regard? Very briefly.
Sure. So a couple of points. One, accessibility in the entire educational system, not just infrastructure, but also the learning content and the teaching methodology The examination system also needs to evolve to cater to different requirements of different disabilities. Somebody with the multiple disabilities requires additional support and additional accommodations, and somebody with other disabilities would require other accommodations that we need to reform. The sensitization, the peer sensitization of children is equally important. I think since it's brief, I'll just put it here. In terms of budgetary requirements, and that's a very critical point you touched upon, for anything that, see, while we are talking of equality, but to provide status quo to the people with disability, there has to be some departure from the way the things are. And that departure requires money. And that allocation has to happen at all levels. And there is a provision in the law which says that for any schemes that the government takes out, there has to be higher allocation for people with disabilities. I think it's 25% higher than the actual allocation in other cases. Similarly, even private schools, private entities, businesses need to have funding, a part of their funding reserved for spending on disability inclusion. When we start looking at disability as part of our life and not as separate, which does not belong to you, is when we will see the changes coming more positive.
All right. On that note, thank you very much, Amar, Arman, for joining us in the program, sharing your perspective and insight. And with that, we conclude this edition of Disha. Today, we were talking about social inclusion of persons with disabilities. We see there is a role that law has to play. There is a role that the government and administration has to play. And there is a role that we as a sensitive, sensitized society have to play. On that note, we conclude this edition of Disha. We'll return next week with another theme which is significant for our society and its empowerment. Namaskar.